So I think we should start. Very welcome, everybody, especially Joris Van Zundert and all our doctoral students. Unfortunately, there are very few or almost nobody from our students of the master program, even though they are more or less obliged to attend. If someone is here, please shout, so you will get extra credits. So all of them have oral exams this week and tomorrow especially. So that's understandable, and we will do a recording of this seminar as usual and publish this on YouTube as soon as possible. The materials will be shared on our GitHub website. And this is the third seminar of our autumn cycle of seminars in Digital and Public Humanities, organized by the Center for Digital and Public Humanities, Ca' Foscari University Department for the Humanities. Special thanks to Stefano Dall'Aglio, who is organizing this cycle, and to Elisa Corot, who is doing the registration and working on the technical side in the background. So thank you very much for this. Before I introduce you to Joris, some more technical, but I mean, most of you are used to our setup of this seminar, so please use the chat for any questions or just to raise your hand in the chat. So for the discussion, I will then be able to give you the word, or if you have trouble, you can also shout, but so Elisa will mute you if this is disturbing during the presentation. Anyway, please mute your microphones. Video is fine. That shouldn't have any impact on the quality of this transmission. Anything else, Stefano, to mention? I think that's basically.
I guess that's it.
Yeah, that's it. Okay. So welcome everybody. I'm very glad to welcome Joris Van Zundert, a senior researcher and developer in humanities computing at the Huygens Institute for the History of the Netherlands, which is a research institute with a very strong digital humanities unit at the Netherlands Royal Academy of Arts and Sciences in Amsterdam. His main research interest is in computational algorithms for the analysis of literary and historical texts and the nature and properties of humanities information and data modeling. His research focuses on the interaction between research software engineering and humanities interaction, the tensions between hermeneutics and big data approaches, the correlation between text-immanent features of text and sociological processes around the concept of literature. He also published widely on computational approaches in stemmatology, narratology, and scholarly editions. A pioneer, a real pioneer in the field. He initiated leads and was involved in many cutting-edge research projects, like the Royal Academy's Alpha Lab project on digital infrastructures for the humanities and the potential of computational humanities. He was the chair of the Interedition project funded by the EU, fostering interoperability and collaboration in tool development for digital textual scholarship, and producing, among other beautiful things, the Collate X software for automated text collation, now widely used by digital philologists. We collaborated happily, I have to say, in the Marie Curie network on digital scholarly editions, Dixit. And according to his website, and as far as I can confirm, he has a deep interest in computing, medieval history, and in literature. He has a disaffection of all procedures, authority, and organizational structures that inhibited curious exploration, creative thinking, and pragmatic innovation. And here and today, Joris will talk about the bestseller code, predicaments of predicting high-value fiction, about the application of computational statistics and machine learning techniques to pinpoint textual markers that can be associated with successful fiction writing. So for us to analyze fiction, and maybe if we ourselves want to embark on a writing enterprise, so even here we can maybe find some help from Joris to make this dream come true. So Joris, the floor is yours. Thank you very much for being here virtually. We all hope to have you here in presence as soon as possible, and everyone else. But for now, we are happy the way it is here.
Thank you, Frans. Thank you for those beautiful words, actually. I almost don't recognize myself. It's a long list. Thank you. Thank you also for having me, by the way. I'm very happy to do this. I'm looking forward. I have plenty of material to talk about, obviously, and I hope that I will be able to keep a little bit to time, and otherwise I'll just skip a few slides maybe. Yes, I wanted to talk mostly today about the projects that I have been involved that look at trying to predict bestsellers, or trying to figure out which word use, which kind of vocabularies are associated with high selling or high in demand or very popular fiction. And I hope that my story will make clear that yes, we are able to use statistical technologies and computational machine learning technologies to predict the popularity, if you will, of certain novels, but that there are also many hairy, nasty, tricky bits still to figure out as to what the quality of these algorithms for predictions are. My travels since roughly 2015 have been that the average success rates for these kinds of technologies is pretty high. It's always up into the 70 or 75% of accuracy, which is satisfying in ways, but it's also very hard to get beyond that. And we are trying hard to figure out why that is. And it's also very easy to make many mistakes with these difficult mathematical technologies. I will be touching up on kind of these errors and mistakes that we made in our work, and I hope that you will be able to learn a little bit from that. I will be touching up on some technological, and mathematical issues. I am not sure how well this will be understandable for this audience. Don't hesitate to put any questions anywhere you can. I'll try to answer them. I won't be explaining all the mathematics in every detail, because that's just not feasible in such a short time. So if there are professional statisticians or computationals among you, please forgive my rough explanations of some concepts that I will do. Trust me, I will do better on paper when explaining these kinds of technologies. So first of all, I need to go to my presentation. First of all, let me explain a tiny little bit about the Huygens Institute, where I'm working. It's indeed the Huygens Institute for the History of the Netherlands, but that's quite broad, actually. It doesn't mean just resources or text only pertaining to the Dutch language. Actually, we have researchers looking into medieval Latin, because those sources were either produced or read during the Middle Ages in what was then called the Low Countries. Actually, they weren't called the Low Countries at that time, but we used to call them Low Countries nowadays. We also do a lot of work in digital editing, indeed. creating the digital editions was actually the reason why I, in 2005, was attracted to the Institute, because they were producing scholarly editions on paper only at that time, and they wanted to get a foothold into digital editing, which is where I have been working for the first years in the Institute. But along the way, we have always been interested, and when I say we, that is Carina van Dall'Aglio, which is the head of the Department of Literary Studies at the Huygens Institute, and my colleagues around in that institute. There are many that I work with. Some that I could name are Marijn Kolen, Peter Boot, Ronald Haantjes-Dekker. You don't have to remember those names, of course, but I just want to stress that pretty much all the work that I do is always work together with my colleagues. So I don't take credit personally for anything that I say here. It's always teamwork. I wanted to return to a golden oldie, as I like to call it nowadays, to show the almost unreasonable power of statistical techniques when you're doing also literary analysis. What you're seeing on the screen is a bit of information or pictures in any case about the authorship attribution project we run on a 13th century medieval Dutch text called the Walewijn, which is the Gawain, the story of Gawain in English. And the Dutch translation has a particular feature that it, in its epilogue, it explains that it has been written by two authors, one Penninck and one Vostart. And somewhere in that text, the latter author took over from the first. But until now, or well, at least until we started using statistical technologies, it was very hard to figure out or to have some real clue or evidence on where that takeover happened in the text. So what Carina and I decided to do is to use a delta measure, which is basically a way of counting the high frequency word use in a text. So words like the particles, words like the verb is or to be, to have, etc. So the words that are very frequent in a text, but therefore are not very much influenced, it seems, by an author. And it seems that every author has a particular rhythm or frequency of using those words, those tiny words. So if we count them using that delta measure, what you end up is with that yellow chart that you're seeing here and the blue squiggly line. And somewhere around that dotted dashed line, vertical line, you see that it suddenly, that kind of delta signal suddenly drops all the way down to a different level. And the interesting bit is that indeed exactly at the half of that dropping, there is the takeover from the one author to the other author, according to the hermeneutical, the qualitative theories that we have about that takeover. So that just shows you, I think, still very nicely how effective, almost indeed unreasonable effective statistical methods can also be for the analysis of literature. It's quite a nice experiment to do, and it has some good results. And so I like to use that still to show how we can actually use statistical techniques very usefully, also in a hermeneutic game that literary research actually is. So enough about that. The projects that I will be talking about today are related or part of a very large project that is led by Carina van Dall'Aglio, which is called the Riddle of Literary Quality. Formally, that project has now been finished in June 2020. And its assignment or its aim was to figure out how people judge literary quality. I should stress that the project was not called solving the riddle of literary quality, because literary quality is a very complex concept anyway, of course, and we're not suggesting that there is one possible answer to say this is literary quality and that is not. What we were interested in is how much understanding can we gain about literary judgments from people using statistical technologies and using surveys and all kinds of quantitative measures that we can derive and infer from literature itself. It may need some explaining why we would look at literature in a quantitative way anyway, and why we would want to look at the texts, specifically the literary full text of novels, to study questions like these. Because if you follow Bourdieu, which a lot of scientists and researchers still do, and for all the right reasons, I think, Bourdieu argued that none of this has to do with, the content of art, nothing to do with the content of text. It's all sociology. So it's all a cultural elite, if you want, that decides among themselves what will be called art, what will be called high literature, etc., and what will not be granted that stature, if you want to. Bourdieu is quite extreme in that sense. But still, we think that there is also a text immanent signal to what we call literature or what we don't want to call literature. Of course, there are social aspects and mechanisms involved. Nobody will deny it. Last of all, we. But we are still interested if we can figure out that there are indeed, if we can prove evidence somehow, that there are indeed also literary signals within the text itself that qualify them as texts that people usually see as literary or non-literary, and we're just interested in those differences. So this project, meanwhile, has also already resulted in some very interesting, I think, in any case, results. We had 2 PhDs successfully defending their dissertations from this project. One of them is Corina Kohle, and she was able to show also, not just by qualitative evidence, I should stress, but especially from surveys and quantitative evidence, that there's really a gender problem in literature review, and in how people are judging literature. I should also stress that all this pertains to the Dutch context, so the Dutch reception of literature, but I think most of the findings are generalizable to the Anglo-Saxon or the European literature theater. But all the research we did was, of course, on Dutch material or translated materials in the Dutch context. So what Corina found was that female authors are systematically underrepresented in publishing. They're just not published as much as as male authors. But also, if they publish, they are judged less literary. So they are more often judged as not producing very literary texts. And it's quite shocking if you see those numbers. And especially if you look at the number of awards and prizes, because although there are as much female authors as there are male authors, female authors only receive 25% of the prizes and awards in the Dutch context. So that shows that there is a real gender problem within literary and the literary reception and the production of literary text, although we are not very aware of that usually. So her dissertation helped quite a lot in getting attention for that problem. She also looked into the text immanent features, if you like, to try to get a grasp. Do the text in some way also represent or boost this kind of gender problematics in literature? And indeed, it's interesting to see that if you have a male protagonist, so the male main character in a text, that will seriously boost the judgment of literariness of your text. So it's simply, if you have more female characters in your book, you are hurting your chances of being seen as elite literature. That's quite interesting, I think. Another colleague of mine, Andreas van Kranenburg, who's meanwhile an assistant professor in Groningen University, started to use statistical measures to try to take another look at this problem. And he has been able to establish that there are indeed interesting differences between those novels that that the audience usually describes as high quality literature, and those novels that are usually described as not so high quality literature, or not literature at all, but just, fiction, general fiction. Some of these are not surprising. So what we tend to see is that literary novels contain much less adjectives and adverbs than non-literary novels, which is kind of intuitively understandable if you know that most creative writing courses do try to teach you to not use these kinds of words. They're usually associated with people that don't know well or don't exercise well the kind of rule of thumb of show, don't tell. It's also not very surprising, probably, to see that if the complexity of a text increases, so many different words are used, or when the text is difficult to sort of compress, so if there are very little words that are repeated in a text, that also the literary ratings rise. This has to do with how complex, difficult people experience the text for reading. And this is somehow associated with the idea that high literature or elite literature should be in a sense complex. Whether that needs to be true, that is something you can discuss, but it's something which is, at the moment, in any case, demonstrable from what people say about these texts and what these texts look like if you measure them as to linguistic qualities. And of course, he was able to show that a lot of trite expressions that everybody uses, expressions that you normally wouldn't expect to be used a lot by real quality authors, if you want to put it like that. Indeed, those kinds of cliches you find all over the place if you look at literature that is not regarded as very high or very high quality literature by the audience. So my role in the project, and I should stress that the project is formally, the project has been closed, has been finalized, but we're nevertheless continuing these trends of research that this project produced, because we like doing that research and because we are still finding interesting things by doing this research. So we're just continuing this type of research and these research trends, and the project itself should be seen as a kind of initial phase of the kind of research that we want to prolong for a very long time still to come. So the projects that I have run in under the umbrella of this larger project have all concentrated on trying to find out what is particular about bestsellers. Now, bestsellers, I should stress, are of course not literature. They don't have to be literature. They can be literature, but they can also be non-literature or fiction that is not regarded as very elite or very high quality literature. Nevertheless, if we know what is particular about bestsellers, it may also tell us something about why people judge some bestsellers to be very high quality literature, and why other people think some of these bestsellers are pure pulp. I have to stress that I don't do this work alone at all. Since 2015 that I have been involved in the projects, I have worked with so many people that I can hardly recall all their names. But suffice to say that it's a teamwork, and I continue doing this work together with these colleagues of mine. Apologies. Just to underline that literature and bestsellers are not the same thing, this is a quote from a forum where people are discussing literature. I think, if I remember correctly, it's from Goodreads, and somebody is asking if there are some rules, essentially, how you could distinguish between, good books and bad books, whatever those are. And then another user is calling upon a very doubtful philosopher called Robert E. Lee to say, that most of the bestsellers is actually pulp literature and not very high quality. Just to show that this is sort of a common or general opinion, that people often think that being a best-selling author is not very much not equal to being a very good author. And indeed, there are shades of gray, I guess, in there. If you look at something like Cloud Atlas, a novel by David Mitchell, that sold, meanwhile, it sold more, by the way, these are old numbers, but it sold 500,000 copies in the US. 100,000 copies were sold as a direct consequence of it being turned into a movie. And I think you will be hard-pressed to find people that will judge Cloud Atlas as non-literary. It's definitely seen as a literary text of high quality. And by all accounts, 500,000 copies sold in the US counts as a bestseller, but it's completely dwarfed by the numbers that 50 Shades of Grey sold, which runs into the 50 million meanwhile, and it's still selling well. Whereas 50 Shades of Grey indeed is seen as, well, definitely not literature, according to surveys that we put out and ask the audience to judge these books. So it all depends a bit on context as well, what you call a bestseller and what you don't call a bestseller, because these are the kind of numbers that you will see in the Anglo-Saxon world. And to hit the New York Times bestseller list, you have to sell anywhere between 5,000 and 10,000 copies per week. Now, don't be surprised that if you sell 15,000 copies in the Netherlands a year, that's a bestseller according to Dutch standards. So it all depends on context, I would say, what a bestseller is. Nevertheless, we are interested whether we can find some linguistical and semantical clues as to what defines these bestsellers. Meanwhile, I have run 3 projects about these bestsellers. I will try to give you some details about the mechanics of the projects and the findings about them, and I will give you a slight glimpse of what we are trying to plan for the future. So the very first project, which was in a sense a pilot project, was actually initiated or brought to our attention by a publishing company itself. Because what is happening in the Netherlands, and this is generalizable to the Anglo-Saxon publishing world and the European publishing world as well, is that increasingly you find that literary publishers have a very hard time to make a revenue. Increasingly fewer titles have to provide the profit and revenue for an enormous amount of books that don't sell or don't sell well in any case. So to give you an example, in 2019 in the Netherlands, 250 novels were responsible in a way for the revenue of the literary publishers in the country, whereas 4 years ago, that was still 400 novels. So you see that a decreasing amount of bestsellers has to take care of the business, the publishing business, being a healthy and profitable business, which is something we don't like to see, because everybody, I guess, here in any case, loves literature and would like to see more literature rather than less. But if it doesn't sell, we have a problem as well. So we're also trying to figure out if we can help publishers with that. Herman Bas, a colleague of mine in the publishing field, did research as to what is happening in publishing houses, and he was kind of shocked about how little business intelligence and how little statistics and how little computational approaches are used by publishers to get a grasp of their business, how well they are doing, and what might sell and what might sell not. And he was wondering if we could help him with that problem, and we thought that was interesting. So basically, the question from that moment on became: can we predict a bestseller, or can't we? And the way you do that, at least if you want to approach it computationally, is that you first of all try to predict the past, because that's easy. You know what happened in the past, and if you can predict the past, then you are likely to also be able to predict the future. So what we know from the past is what titles sold how many copies. That is information we can put into a machine learning algorithm. We can also put the full text, the information about the full text, in that same algorithm. And then basically you let the computer algorithm classify text according to their full text in combination with how many copies they sold. Then you can feed the computer a text that it hasn't seen, and it can compare that text to the full text of successful and non-successful literature or novels. And it can give you an estimate of how well that novel will do. That's in very globally how we go about that task. I will get into some more detail later on. First of all, I want to stress that we are using digital or electronic publications for these kinds of computations, calculations. And we're cooperating with the National Library to get these electronic publications. And it's kind of important to point this out, because it's not a given that the e-publications that exist, or the electronic books that are published, are a good representation or estimate of what is actually being sold, because there are far more physical books still being sold. So that's something you want to figure out if you start doing statistical analysis like these. And this is to show that in this experiment, indeed, the electronic publications that we use to do the calculations are indeed representative of the full spectrum of books that is being sold. So the purple histogram shows you all the sales that were out there, physical books and e-publications together. The orange part, which has the same shape, and that's important in this case, shows you the amount of books that were sold as an EPUB. And the green part shows you how many of those EPUBs are actually available also in the National Library, so as material that they can do research on. It's important to check the fact that these distributions are the same, because otherwise you're comparing apples to pears, of course. Also notice that there's an enormous amount of books that actually sell one copy. We haven't looked into that yet, but it's an interesting part of the production. It's probably self-published novels, all kinds of books that simply didn't take off at all. And they all land in that narrow band of completely non-sellers. It might be interesting to look in the content of those books as well in later times. Also, what we do is we throw out a lot of data. On the left side, you see the actual sales numbers of the EPUBs that we use, but for the computational algorithm, we don't care about the actual numbers that you sold. We only care about did you sell a lot of those texts, or did you sell not at all? And we divide you in either of those groups. And that's the information we put into our neural network in our deep learning model. We use a term frequency, inverse document frequency, to generate a huge table of the vocabulary of all the novels that we are analyzing. A term frequency, inverse document frequency table is simply a frequency table of the vocabulary of novels, but it corrects for the fact that some words are all over the place. Words like the particle, a word like is, verbs, etc. And those are not very meaningful in a semantical way for quality or the content of a novel, a fiction, or literature. Whereas words like party or soccer or war might be much more informative and might much more relate to the semantic properties of a novel. So those words are weighted much heavier than the words that are common and all over the place. That term frequency inverse document frequency matrix is then fed into a neural network. I won't explain into detail what a neural network is, but suffice to say that the neural network is able to get a feeling for what kind of vocabulary is relevant to being a bestseller, a high-selling fiction, and what words are exclusively or relatively often associated with those novels that don't sell well at all. Next to that machine learning model, we also use a very old-fashioned, in a way, statistical model, which counts words in a similar way, but doesn't use all the fancy deep learning computational technology that we have available these days. This Ruchika or min-max model or weighted Jacquard model, it goes by very many names actually, and it's been used a lot of time. It's quite difficult to get an intuition for it, but essentially it does the same sort of thing that the term frequency inverse document frequency matrix does. It has a preference, if you will, for differences in the low frequency use of words in novels. So it's much more interested in things that don't appear that much in text and don't appear in text in fewer documents. So it tries to maximize the differences between documents. Sorry. You may wonder why we are using actually two models. We are because we simply want to be robust. We want to be able to cross-validate and to evaluate those models, the results of those models with each other. If both models give us the same answer and give us the same aspects and properties about these texts, then we can be quite certain that we actually found out something worthwhile. That's the reason why we do that. Again, most of the data we actually throw away. We divide or we carve up all the data into bestsellers or non-sellers. Then we go about sampling and chunking all the full text of all the novels that we use for this analysis, and we then feed that training set, as we call it, into the two models. After the training of the models, we are able to give samples of text that the models haven't seen yet, and we can have the models predict whether those texts will be bestsellers or will not be bestsellers. And well, in the cases that we looked at, we were actually quite well at predicting the sales numbers of those novels that the algorithms hadn't seen. We are up in the 78% of correctly guessing whether a novel would have sold or would not have sold. So that's pretty good. That's pretty interesting that we can do that. Of course, we have to check whether there are all kinds of failures, mistakes, other kinds of signals that we actually are measuring. Are we really measuring selling capacity, or are we rather picking out some social or authority signal? But however way we are controlling for these kinds of other signals that we are possibly measuring instead of selling power, we keep finding the same numbers, and we keep finding relatively high success rates for identifying bestsellers and non-sellers. So we're pretty sure that we are indeed doing a good prediction on these novels. Of course, from a literary point of view, you're much more interested in whether is it a non-seller or is it a bestseller. You are much more interested, okay, but what is it about bestsellers that makes them a bestseller? And unfortunately, I have to admit that it's a man's world still, as my colleague Corina Kohler already also demonstrated in part with her dissertation. But if you are going to look at the vocabulary of those novels that actually sell well, you tend to find that those that have masculine language are actually selling way better than other novels. And we looked at the 676 highest ranking proper nouns, so the proper nouns that are used the most in those novels. And then you see that bestsellers are consistently using more masculine terms in those proper nouns than female terms. Okay, so that was the first pilot project that we did. We then shifted our focus slightly towards the English spectrum because we were able to work with Raymond Marr on a project where there is information about bestsellers from the past. In the Netherlands, we don't have that information available at a level readily available for analysis. And the nice thing about the Anglo-Saxon world is that Publishers Weekly has been compiling bestseller lists since the end of the 19th century, which gives us a ability to see whether we can trace what happens to bestsellers over time. So we know we have compiled a list of bestsellers ranging between 1909 and 1923. 1923 because that's the date. That means that texts from before that date are out of copyright, so we can publish them, we can find them, and we can analyze them, and we can share results. So the colleagues of Raymond Marr in Toronto have been painstakingly digitizing and hunting down all those texts to make that corpus available digital to us, so that we could do a similar analysis on those best-selling novels of those times. And we are able to gauge the popularity of surviving novels, if you want to put it like that, because we can see how popular they still are on Goodreads. Popular in the sense that they're still talked about, that they are still reviewed very well on Goodreads. And we can then compute, of course, the difference between those novels that have sold very well in the past, but are not talked about anymore in modern times, and those novels that might not have sold well at all, but are very popular nowadays, or those that are common. To see how it works, I have to ask you to imagine a 250,000 dimensional space. You're probably not able to. Don't worry, nobody is. Even very qualified mathematicians can't think beyond 4 dimensions. But you can sort of imagine that we are able to divide clusters of novels up in such a way that they occupy particular spaces in a vastly dimensional space. We can only imagine this on a 3D level in a 3-dimensional space, but for the mathematics, it's not important. You can do that in 250,000 dimensions, and that's important because that means that we can compute the position, if you were, of the particular vocabulary of every novel in that particular 250,000 dimensional space. And what you can do is then figure out if there are groups, if the group of novels that has sold very well in the past and the group of novels that were written in the same time and are still very popular according to Goodreads, if they are neatly separable as 2 clustering groups. And to do that, you have to project that in 250,000 dimensional space back down to a picture that we can interpret. You can sort of make out how that works by looking at this picture. On the left side, you see a mammoth in 3D points dispersed in a 3D space. And the UMAP algorithm is able to project that down into a 2D space. So a sort of a map of a mammoth. And you can see that still sort of the parts of the mammoth that we would identify in a 3D space are also represented very closely together in a 2D space. Again, you can do this also in a 250,000 dimensional space. And if we do that on this particular data set, you get something like this. And the interesting thing is that this gives you evidence that indeed there is a text immanent difference between those novels that sold very well but are not popular anymore and those novels that are still popular and might not or might have sold also very well. This is significant, this difference. And it doesn't matter if we look at the raw text, if we look at the post-tagged text, so the part of speech tagging, if we look at lemmatized text, it doesn't matter. We get the same result, which demonstrates that this is a viable result, that difference is real. There is something different between those texts. And of course, that makes it interesting to see what those differences can be. Some low-hanging fruit that we know now is that if you want to remain popular, better write short stories. Surprisingly short, actually. It turns out that best-selling novels, novels that remain popular over time are up to some 30% shorter, actually, than novels that might have sold well, which is, well, 1/3. That's a big lot. I wouldn't have expected that, to be honest. And another clear difference that we found is that sentence length variation is very important. Novels that remain popular use a higher variety of sentence length within the novel itself. So the variation of sentence length in each novel is quite high. When we did that project, we returned to our more Dutch arena, you could say, and we simply wanted to get more evidence. We wanted to know if we were able to repeat our experiments and if we would find the same results when we would work with multiple publishers with a larger corpus, and if we could get to more interpretable features on a higher level than just words. So that is what we have been looking into the last few years. Basically, we were inspired by that by 2 journalists that were interested in our work and that wanted to publish about our work on the occasion of the National Book Week this year in 2020, in March this year. That put us in a little nasty situation because we only got permission from the publishers that were eventually okay to submit their sales numbers to us around November 13 in 2019. And we had to produce an article, or the journalists had to produce an article by March 6, 2020, which gives you a window for analysis of about 3 months, which is very, very, very little time. Because as you know, Christmas is out. We had an intern of us phone after each publisher to get those data. They still weren't coming in. Finally, at the end of January, we were able to get some hold on the metadata shaping and cleaning. We should have been analyzing by February 4. So we were frantically coding a way to get that done, and then our data didn't seem to be there for about 40%. And people at the National Library have been, well, to put it impolitely, working their ass off to get us the data. In a final rush, we were able to do the analysis, and I have seen 2 journalists write an article literally in the last night before it needed to go to the press. So that was a kind of a time-pressed situation. But again, it showed the same thing. Doing the similar analysis on a vastly larger corpus again confirmed that it's a man's world. There's a clear association with masculine language, and there's also a clear link to violence, both cognitively and physical violence, to best-selling novels. Think of that what you want. Another interesting aspect was that we were able to confirm from this complex picture that you have to use the word, if you want to sell, you have to use the words, as it were, that look like the vocabulary of bestsellers. That seems logically, but it's not enough to be perfect in imitating that kind of word use, because that means if you only do that kind of word use, you won't be selling that much. You actually have to be using also words that are exactly not within that particular spectrum to be a bestseller. So you have to find that sweet spot as an author between those words that are very known by the audience and those words, those 5% of words that you have to use to be interesting enough to be a new bestseller. So repeating yourself is not enough. Okay, so that meant that this project gave us nice results, but we weren't at all sure about the robustness of our results because we were working on such a time pressure. Luckily for us, then a brilliant master student turned up and wanted to write her master thesis doing research at our institute. She's called Marleen Tuil, and she has been marvelous in helping us out with evaluating and testing the algorithms and computational analysis that we were doing. She, in a sense, she prevented us, she helped us with overcoming a lot of the predicaments that we saw in the analysis that we did. Just to name a few, we used to chuck out one particular publisher because if we used the novels that were coming from that publisher, we saw that the results were always skewing in very weird ways that we couldn't explain, until Marleen discovered that this particular publisher uniquely, exclusively publishes romance novels. But the problem was that they were labeled as general fiction. So we didn't really know what they were publishing. And they were publishing these kind of novels in such a staggering amount that they would always skew our results. Thanks to the work of Marleen, we are now able to sample their publications way better so that we get a more representative picture of what is actually happening in the field. Another thing that she helped us with is the fact that being a bestseller, having a bestseller, is a very, very rare incident indeed. So it's very hard to have enough samples from bestsellers to actually do big data computation. But there is a technique so that we can create artificial or synthetic samples. So we can, in a sense, create bestsellers that never have existed, but nevertheless have the same vocabulary makeup of real bestsellers. And that enables us to do far numerous experiments and run the analysis much more times, so that we get a much more grip and much more certainty about the fact that these results are stable, however we do the analysis with whatever training and testing samples. Lastly, what she did and what was very valuable to us was a cross-validation of the most common methods or techniques that are used for these kinds of computations, which gave us the certainty that we picked indeed the most effective techniques, which is interesting, which is very useful because there are so many techniques. But she was able to show that we should, in principle, even be able to get better at predicting bestsellers if we travel down the computational route that we are traveling on. And lastly, she was able to confirm or give us some more examples of how masculine all this bestseller business actually is. I'm sorry to say, but if you are like me working in an academic environment, you will probably never be part of a bestseller, because professors, patients, students, universities, and libraries don't do well at all in the best-selling business. If a novel mentions those academic words, it's very likely to not sell, maybe surprisingly enough. Okay, so I have to wrap up. I'm through time already. A little conclusion: can we help publisher? Sure, we can. We can predict bestsellers. That would be interesting. Will we? There are ethical considerations as well. We know that there's one publisher that would readily jump to the occasion to use our tools to kind of select manuscripts. But we are not sure we want to advise it to use those tools in that way, because it always also will sort of initiate a gaming the system kind of way of writing. And that's what you want to prevent, because you don't want to end up with a kind of bland kind of literature that always sells or always is mediocre in some sense. So we're still figuring out if we want to turn this into an actual service. I also said that we were interested in high-level feature, that is getting beyond that word level. We're still counting words in many ways, but that is, I'm afraid, a promise for the future. We are now assembling the corpora of reviews that are produced online, and the corpus that we already have in full text and sales numbers, and we are designing a research and a computational system that will be able to combine that information, and we may be able to then start seeing characteristics in a sense of plot or themes or motives that are associated with either high-selling literature or highly valued literature. We have written a proposal and we have submitted it, but it's fingers crossed that we get the funding and we'll be able to work on this for the next 3 years. That's a promise for the future. That's it for me. I hope this gave you a little idea on what we're working on, how we are trying to do that. There's a lot of mathematics and techniques involved, which I can't explain in complete detail in the time that I have. But if you would be interested, I'm happy to answer questions about the technical details and also other questions, of course. So thank you for your attention, and I hope it was interesting for you.
Thank you very much indeed. So that was more than interesting and a really fascinating, fresh view on the literary business. Really fascinating. I think I will look in at the books at the bookstore in the window in a different way when I see the bestsellers now. No, thank you very much. And I think there's a lot we need to digest, and I think questions will need some time to come up for, but maybe we start with questions to improve understanding, and then I don't know. So our way to do the discussion is you can post your question or just your name that you want to post ask a question in the chat. But we are not too big a group, so I mean, if you feel the impulse to ask your question immediately, just switch on your microphone. So yeah, Tiziana.
Okay. Yeah. Just thinking. I was just wondering how you grab the data. How do you? What kind of criteria or selection of the data? I mean, what kind of data you get? I mean, you were talking about the results and also the methods. Of some methods and some, the process and models that you, but I mean, where do you get those data?
Yes, that's a good question. It took us quite a lot of time in these projects has gone to convincing publisher of sharing their sales data with us. They're not very eager to do that. In principle, we could also have gotten these data otherwise. There are other means of getting to sales data on novels in the Netherlands because we have a foundation that is registering that data. But we would rather work with publishers that are interested in the same questions that we are asking. And the publishers are definitely interested in our questions, but nevertheless very hesitant to share sales data. And in essence, it has meant that we kind of had to sort of promise at the grave of on the grave of our grandmothers that we wouldn't, distribute these data any further. And we didn't, and we will not. We will just publish derived interpretations or conclusions from the data. But as to the data that we are using, so it's sales data from, depends a little bit on what project we are talking about, but normally it's sales data from 2012 until 2019. And that's all sales data within the Netherlands. So that's the electronic channel, so e-publications that are sold within the Netherlands, and physical novels that are sold in the Netherlands. And these numbers are available because when a book is sold, the barcode is scanned, and that's all automated information. And we only need permission from the publisher to enter the database and then download their sales data. And once they have given us permission, we can look at the sales data for each novel over those years. And that's what we use to determine whether something is a bestseller or not. For the full text, so the text, the words of the novels itself, we are reliant on the fact that the National Library has the assignment from the government to collect all the novels that are published in the Netherlands. And increasingly, they are doing that by using the electronic version of the novel. And that is since a couple of years automatically uploaded to the electronic depot of the National Library. So once we know what novels we are interested in, we can actually get the full text from that electronic depot depository. But again, only if the publishers allow us to work with the data. But once we get permission, it's quite easy actually to get to those electronic publications. So in the end, it's the full text, all the words in a novel, plus the information about how well or how not it's sold, is what is fed into our algorithms.
We have 2 comments in the chat. Maybe you ask or make so from Rita Maria Bucciare, it's more common, so that it's diversifying the technique from, so maybe Rita Maria, you want to elaborate briefly on this comment? Are you there? Otherwise, we proceed with Mary. You have you are depressed by the results, Mary.
Well, it's nothing new to me.
Sure, yeah.
But if you think about some of the even current authors like J.K. Rowling, who started publishing ostensibly, under a male identity because of the whole anti-women sense in publishing, so it hasn't changed. But I just wondered if you take into consideration audiobooks, because they seem to have really taken off in the last number of years. And I'm a huge fan of audiobooks, and I buy a lot of them and I read. I listen to them, and I love that whole sense. And it's made me read a lot more fiction than I have been in the last few years. So I wonder, how are they considered electronically published, digital publishing? How do they get taken into account?
Well, we don't. I have to admit, we don't take them into account because we cannot get to them at this moment in time. I completely agree. The audiobooks are a very interesting new, well, not so very new, but at least a growing channel over the last few years for people to reach novels and to read them or to listen to them in that case. But we have no means actually to use that data. So we simply haven't looked at that channel.
Just a question for clarification. So male protagonists raise the chances that you write a bestseller. That was my understanding. Other metadata, so like the gender of the author, taken into account in other metadata. So as far as maybe also, that was the promise for the next project, including analysis of reviews.
Yes, and Marijn Kolen and Peter Boot, 2 colleagues of mine, have been looking into reviews in the past few years very much. They could tell you all about what's happening in the review landscape, as it were. We haven't combined that information yet with the other side, more the production side, you could say, of the novels and the sales numbers. That's exactly the aim, the goal of the project that we are developing now. So I can't tell you much about how it can be controlled for reviewing, etc. As far as for metadata, so for example, the gender or the name, the author, it's a pseudonym or not, the age of the publication, if it's a republication, we can and we do control for that. And as far as I know, all our results hold under those controls. So yes, whether you're a female or male author, sorry to say, but it helps to have a male protagonist. I'm not saying that is something that should be happening, but that's what the numbers currently, in any case, sort of evidence. Yes.
May I?
Please, Stefano.
Yeah, well, I was fascinated, and I was really struck by this very strict relationship between your research and the object of your research. I mean, as I already said, I work on 16th century history, and there is no way I can affect the object of my study. But in this case, I think the relationship is very strict, it's very close, and yeah, you mentioned that. I think that understanding what the perfect recipe is in order to produce a bestseller, I mean, it's not easy, but at least getting the sense of what some of the ingredients may be, I think it can really affect the market, not just from a publisher's perspective, but also from the author's perspective. And I was wondering, well, letting aside the question of the discrimination, of the gender bias and everything, but I was also interested in the fact on how this polarization, let's say, it's convenient to have a male protagonist. How this possible change in the writer's attitude and the publisher's attitude can affect the data itself. Is it possible, to some extent at least, to think that well, the fact that some of the publishers and the authors start to use the perfect strategy, what is going to happen? If everybody's writing shorter stories, for example, then probably there would be an inflation of shorter stories. If everybody's looking for main protagonist, people is having enough of male protagonists. So, well, I'm really see some sort of interaction, what people might be after getting or after learning from your work, and the object of your work itself. I hope it was clear.
Yes, no, you're absolutely right. Actually, this kind of research has the potential to create an interaction effect very much. I in the case of Corinna Kohler, who looked very much at these gender issues, I think we indeed already see such interaction effects. She has been a very vocal and rightfully vocal advocate for female authors in this country, and I think in that sense that has been a tremendous job that she did, and it's still going on. And we can see that that message is now much more explicit and out there about the fact that female authors are underrepresented, and we might expect. I'm not saying that we're seeing that effect already, but we might indeed very much expect that we see a kind of a corrective move, if you will, in the publishing industry to have female authors being more represented. And yes, these it's quite possible that we are creating interaction effects with this research. On the other hand, it's also not the case. We have had some media attention about this kind of research, but on the other hand, it's been really, really quiet as to the reactions to our research in the publishing field. So it's a bit of both. Yes, these interaction effects can be very real, and we are aware of that. There are some ethical questions indeed involved with that. On the other hand, these interaction effects are not running wild yet. But yes, it's quite a possibility that we cause effects like that. Of course, also this has to do with a lot of fashion, if you will. Yes, we could suggest that stories should be shorter to sell better, or to have a higher ability, a higher likelihood of getting awarded prizes or being seen as literature. But of course, this only goes so many miles. If many authors would follow that advice, if it were an advice, probably at some point the audience would be fed up with short stories and would start reading longer stories and preferring longer stories again. And this is certainly what we are considering if ever we would turn this into a kind of a running service, sort of a service where publishers could submit a novel or a manuscript and say, what are my chances? What could be improved? If we wanted to do that, I'm not saying we are, that would mean that it would be a running service that would also have to take the temperature at set intervals of what the market is now sort of wanting, as it were. But certainly with all these electronic streams of the novels being produced electronically and the sales numbers being monitored electronically, we could make such a real-time system a reality. Again, I'm not saying we should, but it's interesting to think about the fact that, yes, we could.
Joris, can you unshare your screen? Then we
Sure.
can see more participants here, and everyone is invited to switch on the video, but not obliged to. So feel free to hide yourselves. It's absolutely fine.
I think it would be a terrible shame if we thought about writing as a formula, and if we thought about shorter books selling, shorter stories selling, because the whole thing about reading and creating a work is that it's unique or it's different, and the author comes up with some hopefully really unique idea and then sets that out. So I would be worried that boom is already a formulaic way to write.
Interestingly, if I can react to that, as a result of having some media attention, journalists also asked Dutch authors about this very possibility. And it's a mixed palette, to be honest. But there was one author that definitely said, I'm not going to try to game the system or use a algorithm to create my books at all. I just write what I want to write. And I think that's a very healthy attitude for authors to have. Yes. So no, again, I wouldn't advocate for a system that's sort of based on popular demand dictates how authors should write. No, please not.
On the other hand, so I of course, it's also my more romantic view on, so I'm interested in these genius or good writers, so you feel it, you see it, and then you just need the publisher or the agent who runs for you and then brings out the book. But I mean, usually it's not the case. So I know friends and colleagues who try to get into the business and who's reading these books at the publishers, not. So it's a terrible job, and they do a terrible job most of the cases. I'm sure. So in that regard, if you look at even J.K. Rowling, I mean, she has been refused so many times, and so many other authors. All these authors have these stories that they were unsuccessful, even though they had the bestseller produced already. And when we look from this perspective, then it would be. So I never thought about the opportunity to use this as a publisher. So that is really intriguing in a way. So I don't like it because, I mean, that's algorithms, and that's not what we want to make a decision about literature. But so it might even help also to find the quality which is really there and is not promoted because we have these agents or these poor clerks or collaborators at a publisher's house who has to read 50 books a day and from the beginning have to judge, oh, this sells or this doesn't sell. So they do maybe a worse job that is even worse than neutral algorithms, of at least for a pre-selection. And then you can always balance this with individual reading. And yeah, of course, I mean. So,
yeah, that's one possibility where we thought this might be a power for good, as it were. That we know that editors and publishers indeed read a number of 30 or 40 manuscripts a day. Of course, they don't read that. What they do is they scan the first paragraph. If that doesn't work for them, it goes on the pile, and very seldomly they read the first chapter. So that's basically their selection mechanism at this point in time. So yes, it could be useful to try to have the algorithm read all the manuscripts and say, well, you threw this one out, but actually it might be a very interesting novel because it's different in a way. So giving those manuscripts a second chance, as it were. And that might be a positive power of such an algorithm, certainly.
Another thing is the matter of fashion, and so a long-term observation about how bestsellers develop, or so because once the machine learning process is finished, it's just a snapshot in time. And taste change, fashion changes. So it would be very interesting to see if these changes in the taste of the readership changes at a certain point over time, or if there are what is stable, what is not, or if the changes are always on the same level. I don't know, whatever the artificial intelligence finds for us. So to see, okay, there are on a regular basis in certain intervals there are changes in taste and best-selling indicators, but they are always in this level, but not in this. This is stable, so that makes a good bestseller all the time. So I don't know, or there are changes over a long time. So that would be really interesting. So what that for this you would need a really wide range of data over time. That's what we do not have. Obviously.
That is that's the pity. Actually, we would love to do a longitudinal study in that sense, but we would be in need of, well, some way of estimating the popularity or how well sold, a particular novel sold, and we fail to have those figures or even those estimates. So yes, we'd love to do a study like that, but yeah, we simply don't have historic data, to be honest.
We have another comment from Rita Maria Bucciarelli. Do you want to raise your voice to share your thoughts? Otherwise, I can read it, but it's in Italian. I don't know if I can translate synchron. She's very happy.
That's good.
Yeah. Okay. Are there more questions? Comment from Mary? Of course, it's which regards also the metadata, contextual information. So awards make bestsellers, of course, and bestseller lists make bestsellers. All these things have a huge influence on the sales numbers, of course. But I mean, that's what you are definitely aware of. It's just a question to identify these and get this into the data to make it analyzable. But are there other interesting indicators or factors that you were surprised to detect, or which are you were aware?
Well, not as to the usual suspects. The difference between professional reviewers or professional readers, so critics, literary critics in newspapers and magazines, awards, prizes, PR campaigns, specific PR campaigns to boost novels of which publishers were convinced they would sell but didn't, and we can these kinds of tactics, if you want to call them, simply work. We see them work and we know they work, and we certainly do not always correct for them, by the way, in our samples, so that those might be hidden influences or known influences that nevertheless are hidden for our algorithm, as it were. But when we can, we do correct for them. But until now, we haven't seen other surprising aspects or influence besides indeed the usual suspects of PR, marketing, prizes, and professional critics.
And the publishers wouldn't share this knowledge with you, probably, because it's part of their strategy.
Yes. If they know some secret that I don't know, they are certainly not sharing it with me.
Yeah. Federico, you want to raise a question?
Yeah, maybe I just lost this point during the presentation, but it would be interesting to know. I got that it's like a predictive algorithm. But when taking into consideration the corpus of text, does it like really make a difference between like original text and translated text? Because this can be like very interesting, like when taking into consideration like different also like markets. Taking into consideration the USA market, it's mainly just made by American writers, whereas like for instance in Italy we have like a bunch of foreign novels coming into the market every quarter. So I think it could be interesting like to have a level of granularity that takes into consideration translated text and like original material.
Yes, it's a good question. I didn't touch upon that subject in my lecture. Indeed. It's a favorite subject of Carina, my colleague. She has been looking much more into that aspect than I have. And the Netherlands is quite an interesting test subject there, because we seem to be Carina checked for if I remember correctly, England, Germany, Sweden, and another country that I don't exactly remember right now. But she did some comparisons, and it seems that those peoples, if you want to call it that, have a preference for their own literature, so literature that's produced in their native tongue, their native language. Except for the Dutch, they seem to be more convinced of the literary qualities of English. So in the Dutch market, it's definitely a asset if you are a native English speaker and are publishing in the Netherlands, even if you're translated. That means. So yes, that's definitely one interesting metadata aspect of the corpus. It doesn't really change the view, the characteristics that we get. This by now quite well-known masculinity that is driving at least bestsellership. So it doesn't influence that result, but it's definitely an interesting aspect to control or to monitor when you're doing this kind of analysis. Yes.
Tiziana has the last quick question, but I have another question as well, so it won't be the last, Tiziana, but quick is fine.
Yeah, no, just okay. No, yeah, quick question. If you, I was just wondering whether you're already published, or if you want to publish the evaluation of risks, or the methods, techniques, and tools you used on this analysis, on the data analysis. I mean, I will actually more. I mean, I'm more interested in the technological aspects. So if you're, where there, I mean, not only of the results, but the whole process. Yeah. So if you're ready, I mean, especially the evaluation of risks and the errors. I mean, how that's probably something that, it would be useful for me.
Yeah, I agree. We should, and I'm sorry to say that we haven't yet. We have been so caught up in actually doing this type of research that we haven't gotten around to properly create papers and articles out of it. Of course, that's high on our priority now that we have some results. But it will at least take a year, I guess, before we have some paper or some article out. I'm afraid to say, but we're definitely trying to get our methods, techniques published.
If there are no other questions, I'm fascinating by taking the publisher perspective, which I never did really, and I have no idea of this business. But so it would be interesting because I mean, bestsellers are the big publishing houses, but of course we have all these smaller publishing houses with a very specific profile, a very specific readership, and they need, of course, then specific algorithms to predict their bestsellers, which are then very fewer numbers, but a very different type. I don't know, publisher who are specialized on poetry or so, everything that sells not very big, but sufficiently to sustain a publishing house. And even they are struggling maybe with choosing because the producer side, the authors are more than they can digest. So even here, that would be something for your future research. Just an idea. And the other thing I want to mention is because you have been mentioning expert reviewers, so who write good or bad reviews in newspaper or literary journals. Then we have the non-expert reviews, so in Goodreads, so the ranking and so. And there's what's his name? Rebora, not Alessandro Rebora. Please help me, who does analysis of Goodreads, computational linguistic analysis of emotions expressed and affection that are analyzable in these reviews of common readers. And so that was very convincing. So what I heard from him, 2 presentations. So this is also something that could be very interesting to combine then with the data you produce for scanning or analyzing the texts themselves and the metadata. So just an idea to bring this together. So I think there are a lot of options to refine and to combine the data.
Yes, no, you're completely correct. That is my colleagues Marijn Kolen and Peter Boot have been working much more with that kind of very unpolitely we call it amateur reviews, which is a word that I don't much like because what will be amateur about it? But it's basically their type of research. So I can't really tell you much about it, but it's definitely a part of the upcoming project to combine those sets of data.
Simone Rebora, I read here in the chat, so that's him. So he needs to be credited for his good work. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll check, by the way, if Marijn and Peter are aware of his work. I take it they are, but I'm not sure, so I should check.
Yeah, please do. So it's very definitely worthwhile.